Hello there! Guess who's got a bee in his bonnet about something? In 2023 we made a couple of videos about the Lamenters, everyone's favourite sad yellow space marines from Warhammer 40,000 that I happen to have a whole army of. And a comment came up a few times on those videos that I want to talk about. Specifically,
for those we cherish, we die in glory.
For those we cherish, we die in glory.
For those we cherish, we die in glory.
No comment on how their warcry is literally the best in the entire game? For those we cherish, we die in glory.
So apparently the Lamenters battle cry is, for those we cherish, we die in glory. Which was news to me, and at the time I'd just read nearly everything ever officially written about them and not seen it once. The closest you got to a battle cry or motto in any book I could remember was, from blood born to blood evermore consigned, which is said in the first Imperial Armour Badab War book, but the chapter's relationship with the phrase is not exactly clear. But if you search for the phrase, for those we cherish, we die in glory, there's plenty of people citing it as official, there's fanworks using it, I've seen it tattooed on somebody, and it's even showed up on the Warhammer 40,000 wiki, unsourced of course, because it's the 40k wiki. But despite being a little dubious as to its authenticity, I have spent the time since making those videos wondering where people were getting it from. So many people were saying it had to come from somewhere, so I resolved to figure this thing out. So I thought, let's be logical about this. The first and most obvious explanation is, I'm the problem. I have either never read the specific official source it comes from, or have read it, but forgotten about it. This is my go-to explanation, as 40k fluff is vast and spread between more books than any one person can reasonably read or retain. Plus, I think it's healthy to not assume yourself above forgetfulness or incompetence. This battle cry is pretty fitting for everything we know about the Lamenters. They do care a lot more about regular humans than Space Marines tend to, and they die a lot, so it could very well be true. Thankfully, despite the masses of 40k books over the decades, the Lamenters haven't actually had that much written about them, and I did read most of it already for the History of Lamenters video, so I went back to check that stuff again. More specifically, I reread everything official I could find on them published before 2009. Why 2009? I have my reasons. We'll get to it later. Anyway, that meant that I needed to check the original Badab War article, the Ian Watson novel Space Marine, the Cursed Founding articles, the Fall of Malvolian short story, the novel Red Fury, as well as every other small snippet of info from White Dwarf or a codex or a campaign guide, anything I could possibly find that said anything about the Lamenters at all from any official source from before 2009. And after all that, I'm fairly certain that I've read basically everything put out about them where we find any fluff details from that period, and nothing even resembling that battle cry was in any of them. The Badab War Forge World books were released after the cut-off date, but no, it's not in those either, if you were curious. However, since it's so easy to miss stuff and I don't trust my own abilities, I also asked about the origin of the phrase publicly, both in a YouTube community post and on Blue Sky, to see if anyone knew where it came from. And no one did. There were many guesses, but at the end of the day they were just that, guesses. Nobody actually knew, and most of the guesses were things I'd already checked. Nobody could definitively point to a source. Even GW writer Gav Thorpe himself was tagged into it, and he said he wasn't able to find anyone responsible. And he's Gav Thorpe. We have a whole running gag about him showing up in our videos because he's been involved in writing so much for Games Workshop. Which sort of leaves us with the second explanation as to where the battle cry comes from. It is just something the fandom cooked up, and a lot of people have just accepted it as fact because it sounds about right. I felt this theory was likely for a few reasons. One, the wiki that does cite its sources a lot better, Lexicanum, didn't have this battle cry on there. 2. The previously mentioned Byzantine nature of 40k's backstory means there's quite a lot of cases of fan canon being mistaken for actual canon. The Blood Ravens aren't actual thieves, for example. And 3. When you really take a look at the battle cry, it doesn't actually feel very 40k on reflection. It's a little too positive sounding, like it was written by someone who's a fan of the Lamenters, rather than GW's writers who treat them like Miles O'Brien and feel the need to torture them once a season. But even if it is purely a product of the fandom, that still means we can probably find an origin point for it. We just need to check different places. Now, I'll be honest with you, I kinda suspected it was a fandom thing from the beginning, so I actually checked this side of things first. That's why I had the 2009 cutoff date earlier, but I should probably explain how I got that date. So, if the battle cry was indeed a fandom thing, it initially seemed to come from a very unusual place. A casual search for the earliest use of the phrase "for those we cherish, we die in glory" will lead you to a fanfiction by the Crimson Lord called "For Those We Cherish" from 2016, and the thread on the Space Battles forum containing it from July of that year initially seemed like it might be the oldest use of the phrase on the internet. The full battlecry itself is used in its 5th chapter from August the 12th.
He remembers the promise, the blood oath, whispered through the vox link of every Astartes present. As long as a single life can be saved, the Lamenters will not abandon Slaughterhouse 3. He remembers standing shoulder to shoulder with his brothers, the masses of weeping humanity behind them, bolter blazing in his hands, shouting out the chapter's battle cry in the face of nightmarish odds. For those we cherish, we die in glory.
You may not be able to tell this from this excerpt, but the story is about some Lamenters ending up on the planet from the Rooster Teeth animation Ruby. So yes, this is a crossover fic. I have never watched a single episode of Ruby, just doesn't look like my kind of thing, so I cannot fairly judge if these two settings fit well together. Feel free to enlighten me if this is or is not the case in the comments. However, the first thing that made me realise that this likely wasn't actually the origin point of the phrase was that the very first reply in the thread was by a person named Gladsome Praetorian, and they used the full battle cry in that post nearly a fortnight before the actual story did. And whilst it's possible they were just riffing on the title of the story and the author liked how it sounded and so included it later, it does come across like Gladsome is quoting something that already existed. And then I remembered, aha! Wasn't there that fan-made Badab War supplement that Bell of Lost Souls put out around 2009? That's got the Lamenters in it, and they had to make up a bunch of stuff to flesh out the chapters, since it was released right before Forge World did their version, so there was bugger all written about most of them. Maybe it's from there? Nope. Although it is the only thing I've read with Bell of Lost Souls written on it that hasn't given me a headache, so we should probably make a video on that PDF sometime. It's got a faction in it called the Dog Boys. After this I realised I'd need to dig a little deeper, more specifically into older versions of pages I'd already looked at. And the one constant place it showed up over the years was on that 40k wiki page, so I went back through the previous versions of it until I hit the date it appeared. On the 5th of August 2008, the battle cry appeared on the page, seemingly added by a user called Futhark, which shocked me for a couple of reasons. For starters, I wasn't aware the terrible platform the 40k wiki is hosted on, Fandom, previously Wikia, was around in 2008, but it apparently just turned 20 years old, so hush my mouth. And the other thing was that it turns out the 40k wiki had an even worse culture of not citing its sources in the past, as nothing on this version of the page has a source at all. Look, I know that there's a lot of people who put a lot of work into it, but that wiki is of limited use because even now it doesn't use in-text citations. You know, these things. Instead just lumping all the sources into a big list at the end of the page, so you never know where any individual thing comes from. Which makes it easier for, hypothetically speaking, Stuff like an unattributed battle cry to exist on the website for 16 years without anyone noticing. So yeah, that's why I was looking for an official source before 2009. Any official origin point couldn't really exist after its appearance on the wiki, although it still doesn't appear in anything official afterwards either, just to be clear. Now, this wiki entry is the oldest use of the phrase "for those we cherish, we die in glory" I can find anywhere online. If you can find an older instance, please let me know, because as far as I can tell, this entire thing was started when one person added this line to the 40k wiki in 2008. It wasn't a phrase seemingly used anywhere else to talk about anything else, let alone from an official Games Workshop source. But now you'll see nothing but Lamenters if you search for it. Should probably also mention that this isn't actually on the Lamenters 40k wiki page anymore, because after I publicly asked about it last year, one of our viewers who's a contributor over there came to the exact same conclusion that I have and finally removed it from the page. So, good work. Now, of course, we are left with some new questions like, where did they get the phrase from to begin with? Seriously, I have no idea where the phrase comes from. Searching for the phrase from before it was added to the wiki mostly just returns a lot of people talking about Christianity, since it contains the words cherish, die, and glory, and those just happen to show up a lot on those kinds of pages. I've seen someone posit that it might be paraphrased from the 1997 song Hallowed Be Thy Name by the band Indecision. Which is a phrase that got some public attention in 2011 thanks to a famous photo of an injured soldier who had it as a tattoo, but before that it would really only be known to you if you were into hardcore punk during the 90s. I suppose I could try asking the person who edited the page, Futhark, but since they stopped contributing to the wiki a decade and a half ago, they'd never see a message if I sent one. They didn't leave any info that would be helpful for contacting them via any other means, and their name isn't unique enough in this space to find them elsewhere either. Plus, perhaps more importantly, if their bio is true and we assume that they were at least 10 when they got into tabletop games, possibly they were a big fan of tactics, then this person is at least 80 years old. There is a very real possibility they are not with us anymore. And I'm gonna be honest with you, looking at the other things they said elsewhere on the wiki, I don't think they're the sort of person to just make something up. In fact, here's a quote from them about fan-made Space Marine chapters on the wiki from January 2009.
Fan-based material has been a very contentious issue as of late. Personally, I think it has no place in a wiki setting, because it taints official material with false information.
And when combined with the rest of their history, they seem pretty adamant that only official material ended up on the wiki. So how is it that someone like that adds something with no discernible source? Now, when I first wrote this script, that was kinda where the story ended. Futhark added it, and I didn't know why, since it seemed out of character for them. But after starting production on this video, I was going over various things to get screenshots of them, and I was reminded that Rex Aresius, the person who I mentioned earlier that corrected the wiki, had stated a date for its appearance on the wiki that was earlier than Futhark's entry. Which was a little strange to me, since if you go through the previous versions, it's not there before Futhark's amendment. But Rex's comment made me realise I needed to look a little bit closer. And I discovered that I'm not the only person who doesn't really understand how to edit a wiki. On the 16th of February 2008, 6 months before Futhark's edit, some random person, seriously they didn't even register a name, made an edit to the Lamenters page. But it seems they messed up the formatting or something, so their amendments weren't actually visible. But when you look at the changelog, you can see that the only thing that was added was "For those we cherish, we die in glory" as a chapter motto. This means that Futhark is innocent. The only things they are guilty of is fixing the formatting, changing the label from motto to warcry, and correcting the unnecessary capitalization of the word glory. So, like many bits of misinformation found online, it looks like the origin point for this all is just some f***ing guy. Were they inserting their own headcanon into the wiki? Were they told it by someone else and assumed it was correct? Or were they just lying because they thought it would be funny to lie on the internet? Who knows? This was their only contribution to the wiki, so it's hard to figure out what sort of person they were beyond someone who probably shouldn't be editing wikis. Although it is interesting how the invented battle cry felt so fitting for the Lamenters. It's probably why it caught on so well. Because in 2008 we didn't have the Badab War books yet, so their habit of throwing themselves into nightmare situations to save regular people because they seem to actually value human life hadn't 100% coalesced officially yet. Although it's possible the Lamenters having a bleeding heart as an icon meant that this was an obvious way for them to go, so it's not actually that peculiar that the random user managed to guess their eventual vibe correctly. So, what do we do with all this? Well, for one, we now know that this is not canon. It's fanon. So continue to use it in your fan works by all means, but just know that that's what it is. It also shows why citing your sources correctly is important. But more broadly, this does illustrate how easily incorrect ideas can spread if they sound more or less correct. It took 16 years for someone to look at this piece of information on a wiki and go, hang on, there's no source for that. And even then, it was only after some Z-tier YouTuber brought it up. But by now, it's already all over the internet. On some level, it's too late. It's going to take a lot more than its removal from the wiki for some people to entirely stop citing it as official. And what I can't help but think about is, and I'm sorry to sneak a moral up on you this late in the video, but what if this wasn't some silly bit of trivia about toy soldiers? What if this was about something that was actually important? Mis and disinformation is rife online these days, and it's not showing any signs of getting better anytime soon. It's easy to know to fact-check something when you have reason to suspect it's wrong, but when you're given a fact that sounds correct, how often do you actually check if it is? I probably wouldn't have thought to check this had I not functionally already done most of the research for a different video. How many times have you made a decision and your choice was based on stuff you hadn't actually verified for yourself? You just trusted what someone said. Choosing which way to vote, for example. Something to think about. And that's before you get into the glut of AI-generated slop flooding the internet now. To go back to Warhammer stuff, so this doesn't get too depressing, here's the Games Workshop Wiki. A fan wiki where countless pages have been AI generated. And the thing about generative AI is, when it does not have access to a certain piece of information, rather than just say that, it's quite likely to just make something up. It is, after all, not actually intelligent, that's just marketing. For example, here is the Games Workshop Wiki's page for the Blood Bowl spin-off, Crunch. Here I have highlighted every part of the entry that is wrong, or just waffling about things it can't know to fill space. That is nearly everything in there beyond its name and the year of release. And AI advocates wonder why people like me think it sucks. Yeah, boil off a lake's worth of water every 45 seconds to get an answer wrong or make a weird picture of shrimp Jesus. Seems like a great use of resources. But if you search for Crunch on Google, this bollocks comes up on the first page. Hell, when I first started writing this video, it was near the very top. And you wouldn't know that all of this is nonsense unless you had actually played this relatively obscure game from 1991, or possibly watched this video from a familiar channel. And again, this is on a frivolous subject. Nothing bad is going to happen because you get facts about Crunch wrong. Truth be told, I don't really care if you get facts about Crunch wrong. But what I do care about is people using AI and not caring if they're misinforming others because doing the legwork is apparently too hard, especially when it's legwork that I have literally done. And of course, because we live in the worst timeline, this stuff happens all the time on subjects that do matter. Even Wikipedia itself is having to combat this stuff, with some AI-generated segments inventing places or even containing fake citations, just to make detecting it even harder. What if, for example, you were looking for medical advice and you stumbled onto an AI-written article? Do you know enough about medicine to know if it's accurate or not? And we all know what happens when AI writes mushroom foraging guides. So to reiterate the question from earlier, what do we take from all this? Well, kinda bleak and obvious, but don't believe everything you read on the internet, especially now. As well as honest mistakes and people deliberately lying for fun and profit, some misinformation is spread because people can't be asked to actually write something and just let a computer do it. So don't be afraid to do some fact-checking when something seems off, or even seems a little too convenient. Oh, and if you're thinking of using ChatGPT or whatever to fill out a wiki page, just know, I will find you. However, to end on a more positive note, a while ago after I posted about this stuff originally, I was informed of this Reddit thread where, due to the Lamenters battle cry being removed from the wiki, people were discussing how it wasn't actually canon. And sure, it was brought up how some people weren't convinced and maintained its authenticity despite there being no proof, but this thread does show that if you cut off misinformation at the source, you can start making headway against it. Some people will always continue to believe a lie regardless of how thoroughly you debunk it, because admitting you were wrong is horrible. No one likes to do it, but some people isn't everyone. And I don't know, I just think that's something worth holding on to. We don't have to give in to the constant barrage of misinformation we face every single day. Even if we can't convince everybody, we can push back against it. Even when the misinformation we're talking about is as low stakes as what the fictional bright yellow super soldiers say when they're charging into battle against giant hungry bugs. Thank you very much for watching this therapy session I've hidden in plain sight as a YouTube video. If you enjoyed it, then I'd appreciate a like or a sub or a comment, and if you'd like to help us continue to make videos like this, then please take a look at patreon.com/snipeandwib, where for as little as $1 a month, you can see these videos early, get your name in the credits, see exclusive videos, and get a warm glow from knowing that you're enabling us to think far too much about Space Marines. Also, if you are a big advocate for generative AI and use it in the ways I have critiqued in this video, and are offended by how dismissively I talk about it, good.